be with you and everyone who has joined the event today. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for having me with you today. Networks such as yours are incredibly important when it comes to connecting crucially EU policies with politics at a national level and also at a trans-European level, I should add. It's absolutely vital input also that you can provide us here in the European institutions with regard to knowledge and understanding. And of course, these debates and debates such as the ones that we will be having today, the Open EU debate, are also essential for connecting the European political leadership with good analysis and research. That's increasingly vital these days, as indeed as we are busy responding to a major crisis, we do definitely not always have the opportunity that we also would need while responding to slow down and reflect. It's not the first time that we have the opportunity and pleasure to take a moment to reflect together. Earlier this year, in fact, right in the middle, in the heat of the immediate crisis, students and scholars from the ULB came together to brainstorm on crisis communication, and colleagues of mine were engaged in that, and we presented what we were doing, and we got really precious feedback, I felt, because it was reported back to me from in great detail. I was very interested, so thank you very much also for the good reflections that were produced on that occasion. Many of the things that are important in a crisis when it comes to communication were also addressed initially there. Timing of the crisis response, the communication response, the roles and expectations in a crisis, how we actually have agile and effective systems in place to produce the adequate communication, and also, of course, symbols and tradition have a role to play there. There were recommendations made on both strategy and tactics for crisis communication on that occasion, and we have really also reflected and will continue to build on those interesting first recommendations. So my thanks go also to those who participated then, and to you who are participating now. I look really much forward to having another excellent conversation this afternoon. And I will focus on three things. I will first give an overview of the Commission's communication response to the coronavirus crisis. Then I'll try to dive a little bit deeper into what's next on the horizon in terms of communicating in this exceptional phase that we have before us, and what plans we have. And then I will reflect a little bit on what changes and trends mean for our communication more broadly. And afterwards, I look forward to hearing, of course, crucially, your questions and views, and hopefully lively debate. I'll first then give an overview of how we responded at first to the coronavirus crisis in our communication in the European Commission. You will not be surprised if I said that it was a big job for a rather small army of communicators to actually, in this situation where all of a sudden we found ourselves very quickly in a mainly virtual environment, we had to actually still be able to connect with Europe's 440 million people in 24 languages. So let me go through maybe quickly the three-phased approach. Phase one, as I was saying, was about reacting to the crisis, both in terms of communication and institutionally. So first, we were really in full crisis management and communication mode. And some defining elements were, you could say, establishing a centralized and unified messaging that still very much continues as we speak. But of course, in the very early days of the crisis, it was extremely important that every part of the organization was aligned to the impulse that was being given by our president, who put together, as you will remember, at the very early stage, a crisis response team of commissioners, a coronavirus crisis response team of commissioners, and organized also very much the political communication flowing from that crisis team that was operational at the first moment on the president's initiative, and literally here in the building, happening and being orchestrated in the 13th floor of the Berlaymont building, because again the president could no longer move around Europe and travel, as indeed she was previously, of course, also doing when she was engaging with leaders and communities across Europe. So establishing that unified communication that then flew and trickled down to the day-to-day service that orchestrates our public political communication to media, our spokesperson service, and then of course fully mobilizing other parts of the house that have their part to play. In addition to, of course, continuing to be led by the communication of the president, the members of the college of the commission, who also very actively engaged in the forms of communication that were possible, in addition to the spokesperson service that I mentioned, and our offices, our representations in member states and beyond, just to mention some of the key communication actors that were mobilized there, as we were really very busy to align and centralize the communication, to unify it, and also ensure that it could be speedy enough, because that's of course the other part of the crisis communication requirements. You have to get out there fast to respond. But that was not all. We very quickly experienced that to be able to also bring everybody in the services on the same page, it was useful to create also a broader forum of communication coordination. So we set up a task force to respond indeed, and to align and coordinate our broader communication to citizens in a task force. So structure and leadership on corporate communication was also to support and indeed mirror what was going on at the political level, very important. We set up a virtual press room for journalists, and of course we critically also here, as normally in communication, realize that communication here is as much a listening as a speaking exercise. So also our political reporters on the ground in our representations were extremely vital in actually informing the communication and the messaging that we put out. Our president was very keen to put everybody on the same page with regard to the policy response that the Commission was initiating, when at first, of course, it was very much concentrating on coordinating the actions of member states. You will also, I'm sure, tell me that it didn't look very coordinated at first, and it took quite some effort and realization, of course, before member states realized that we could only really beat this virus or start fighting it effectively by working together. But this was very much a coordination effort, and to mirror the response. Also digitally, our president was very keen to set up a central hub for our messaging and our policy initiatives. So we set up a website where we basically, of course, promoted as much as we could traffic towards the website, driven by our social media activities, leading to, I think we're around a bit under 5 million page views since the creation of the website early March, and just to give you sort of some figures, 20,000 social media posts were involved through the crisis, and 30 million video views, because you will have seen, I'm sure, many of the videos that our president put on social media. That was a privileged form of communication for her, to every time a new action was taken, to communicate via a video that was then put out via our social media accounts, and there of course adapted also by our representations in different languages. And we also had, of course, our open channel of communication with citizens, responding directly to their questions as well. So um, I think what was important there was also that we used social media a lot, because it's a visual environment, and in a crisis, visuals are particularly important. I will come back to that in a moment. So we focused very much on visual and video communication. People get very visceral, need tangible, need tangible, let's say, action to be shown, and that was very much driving our efforts in that respect. So we shared images along our messaging areas. So it was about, in the early phases of the crisis, showing things like repatriating or supporting the repatriations of citizens who had got stranded due to lockdowns, and indeed some, very big reductions in the airline traffic. It was about showing supplies being brought to the right destinations. It was about showing that the EU was involved very directly in this solidarity action to get equipment to where it was needed. And indeed, maybe I think it's fair to say that one of the most striking turning points in the crisis was when we began to see images of Romanian doctors arriving in Italy, because until that point it was actually hard. We saw it very much also in the state of public opinion in places like Italy, so dramatically hit by the pandemic. It was very hard until then to visualize the solidarity that was actually starting to happen. But this made it easier. It was a kind of turning point that was then followed by other communication, of course, important media communication as well by our president. But really, these visuals, and also the ability of our representation in Italy also to show very visually what was happening was really key. So acting concretely in the health crisis and making it tangible, that was really important. It was, by the way, also the case when we were able to show images that then started also turning up on national television of green lanes to keep Europe open for the circulation of vital goods. This was the kind of thing that made it more real to people, that the EU was actually responding in the crisis, even if, of course, this happened in parallel with things which were less obvious for people to relate to, namely the coordination, the alleviation of the economic impact that was starting, of course, to be felt in member states through this temporary state aid framework, the wavering of or the triggering of the escape clause that enabled indeed also the financial means to be increased drastically in member states to respond directly to the immediate impacts of the crisis. But that was less easy to visualize. So therefore, all the other actions were very important. So to show, the masks, the protective equipment, the ventilators, which were being indeed also sent from member states to other member states who needed it, and indeed also with EU support, joint public procurement actions, etc. So one thing that really also I think illustrated the importance of acting concretely and in the health crisis was the global response, the fundraising marathon that was hosted by our president, kicked off in early May, where we saw leaders plug in from around the world to commit funding to fill research funding gaps and to bring countries together to fight the coronavirus, and to show also a commitment to multilateralism. It was about indeed mobilizing funding for the vaccines, of course, first and foremost, for testing and for diagnostics. And it enabled us to team up with civil society like Global Citizen, with international organizations, and celebrities like Hugh Jackman and Miley Cyrus. I hope that some of you were able to follow it. It showed two things, in my view. Namely the communication potential of major events and cooperation with high-profile figures in such situations to reach out broader on a concrete and very mobilizing project. And then second, of course, what is really possible when communication mutually reinforces policy, when they act as two sides of the same coin. That was the global response. So the importance of tangible, concrete action, visibility. So building on that, we have moved into what one could call phase two, a phase where it's about reclaiming momentum and lead on the narrative. And when I say that, I mean getting a coherent narrative across about what we are doing to face the crisis and indeed bring solutions and prepare the ground. Even if we're still not in the recovery phase, we are certainly very much preparing the ground for it after having taken some immediate action. First, the immediate crisis response, the immediate economic response, and now being in a phase where we are preparing the recovery. So there again, the very fully consistent messaging across the institution and beyond, I would say, all the actors that have a role in this is extremely important, and also to be as proactive as possible in the communication when it comes to showing the role that the European Union has, and that indeed we are leading as the Commission in charge of taking many of the initiatives in the policy areas, from coordinating the exit strategy, reopening the tourism sector with support, of course, involved also there, and preparing, as I was saying, the recovery. And in this phase, we are also now looking at not only the political communication, which of course is important when every time a new initiative is taken, and continues to be the case, but we also need to look broader and see how can we actually get across to citizens and basically, of course, we have to look at very much how public opinion there is affected, and there we are preparing we call it at the moment the recovery campaign. That's a working title, where we are focusing on the full European Union, but we will have special focus on 7 countries that have been in public sentiment and opinion terms particularly affected when it comes to the perception of the European Union action. We're talking Italy, we're talking Spain, France, Belgium, Austria, Czechia, and Greece. And again, this is the starting point. The choices that are made were based on data and research on public opinion about the EU response in these countries, and relates to things like decrease in trust in the European Union, and also perceptions about the European Union action, even if we also see in the sentiment analysis that is emerging, and which at the moment is only partial, because also, for example, our Eurobarometers have been affected by the crisis. We haven't been able to do the interviews that we normally do or that rather the because it's not us, it's a completely independent operation carrying out the interviews, but these interviews have not been carried out, of course, in the usual normal way. So we are basing ourselves on more partial analysis for the moment that will soon be completed by a more comprehensive EU 27 analysis on with Eurobarometer as one of the very important instruments that we can use for that. So we will seek to design a communication campaign, communication actions, where we will base ourselves once indeed we have political agreement about the recovery plan for Europe. We will try to roll out a recovery campaign where we will address indeed this perception about insufficient EU presence in the crisis, which again has evolved considerably over the crisis period, and is changing all the time, of course, from the beginning, when indeed we were not able to yet show so much as tell the story. So it's better when you can show it than only tell it. Now it's more about preparing how we will actually communicate the recovery efforts and indeed the recovery plan for Europe in a way that makes it clear what it means to people. So seeing it from people's perspective, seeing it from the perspective of impacts from impacts and benefits for citizens. So this is something that will be kind of an umbrella campaign that very much will precede, but then be followed, but not replaced by already planned campaigns on the Green Deal and also digitalization. You know, the twin transitions, which were and remain top priorities in our recovery planning, but of course reviewed in light of indeed the needs for recovery, in addition to, of course, building a more resilient Europe. So we will apply all the lessons that I've talked a bit about already from our communication during the coronavirus crisis, the health crisis, because of course, which is far from over, as we know. And then that will then enable us to fully go into the recovery phase, which of course will last for a long time, for several years, once we have the instruments at European level, because of course this is complementing what is also being done and continuing to be done at national level through hopefully ambitious the ambitious multi-annual financial framework and recovery instrument proposals, the next generation EU instrument agreed by the EU institutions, starting with the very soon to be upcoming European Council that has, by the way, also been just mentioned in our President's speech in the European Parliament when the presentation of the German presidency priorities took place with the German Chancellor. So if I now go from the three phases in the recovery campaign and the recovery campaign, but maybe I just, before I do that, let me just say a few more words about the recovery campaign, because of course it's important to add that this campaign will have as its target audience adults. It's a quite broad target audience because it's all who have been affected by the economic impact between 25 and 60. And we will seek to reassure citizens that the economic recovery and the transition to a sustainable and climate neutral economy go hand in hand, and that this twin transition will create opportunities for their families and communities, as well as new and better jobs, and that indeed the green transition will benefit both health, environment, our financial and economic situation. And the campaigns will also aim to convince citizens to change their behavior and make more sustainable choices. Because when fighting climate change, we need a group. Let me talk about the recovery plan itself a little bit, because I think it's important to go back to what it really underpins our communication here with Next Generation EU, which is, of course, as I was saying, an instrument that is embedded within the EU budget. To give you a quick snapshot, it's supporting member states to recover, repair, and emerge stronger from the crisis, with public investment having a vital role to play in a balanced and sustainable recovery, and also the bulk of the funding from Next Generation EU, with more than 80% will being used to support public investment. And it also supports key structural reforms in member states, concentrated where the crisis impact and the resilience needs are greatest. So that's the first point, supporting the member states themselves on the recovery. Then it's about kickstarting also the economy and mobilizing private investment, where urgent action is needed to kickstart the economy and create the conditions for a recovery. And much of this will be led by private investment in key sectors and technologies. And this investment is particularly crucial to the success of Europe's Green Deal and transitions, and digital transitions. And we expect that investment needs amount to at least 1.5 trillion just in 2020 to 2021. And investment in key sectors and technologies, from 5G to artificial intelligence and from clean hydrogen, which was just the subject of a package we issued today. Perhaps some of you heard our Executive Vice President Timmermans and Commissioner Simpson present this package, which is also about offshore renewable energy and a green energy strategy holds the key to Europe's future. I think we can get to the conclusion quite quickly, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. But I just want to make sure that I got my points across about the campaigns. I mean, of course, what underpins what we're doing right now is the whole structure and logic of our recovery plan proposals, with indeed the MFF proposal and the instrument, the Next Generation EU, that enables us to really boost investment in green and digital transitions and resilience through channeling it through the multi-annual financial framework. That needs to be accompanied by a strong citizens-focused communication campaign, so that people will be able to perceive the recovery and indeed the impacts also on their own situations of the recovery clearly, and more clearly, of course, than naturally it has maybe been possible to perceive some of the European Union action in the immediate health crisis, because there, of course, first priority, of course, is the immediate health response, which very much took place at national level, with the European Union action complementing the national actions. So this is really the logic. But this doesn't take away the need also to have strong campaigns on the Green Deal, indeed, which was in focus in our initiatives today here in the Commission, with some energy initiatives and a focus on hydrogen. And then the digital campaign, which will also accompany the digital transformation that we have indeed also very much as part of our political priorities, priorities which will remain extremely present in the recovery perspective. So if I come to the conclusion that I would like to draw for the trends in communication, I would like to share a few lessons that we will be carrying forward in these efforts. Some of the trends that might have been being accelerated by the coronavirus crisis. Um, After the rejection, one could call it, of experts, there was a real opposition to expertise in communication in the late 20s and the 2010s. They are coming back in fashion. For example, also very much, let's say, illustrated by the fact that we have also, even in our leadership as president, we have a medical doctor, which of course has been an incredibly lucky coincidence, and perhaps it's not such a coincidence. Our president von der Leyen, and this new confidence and trust in expertise is really something that I think we will carry with us after the crisis. Then there's the obvious thing that we're doing right now instead of me standing, and that would have been much nicer, I have to say. But the fact that we can connect across countries makes it, of course, extremely rewarding also to be working remotely. It's something we will be doing much more undoubtedly, and also having conferences such as the one we're having now. So the importance of online communication will undoubtedly only grow. And then we will have deeper institutional cooperation in EU communication. And we have worked closely with Parliament, Council, and others, and the benefits communicating under one EU brand is obvious. And then during and following traumatic events, such as, of course, the coronavirus crisis, where we have tragically lost so many lives, have made it even more important to be empathetic in our communication, and to connect with people should therefore be really even more central than it has already been, and that we have tried to indeed work with in our corporate communication for a while. It will become even more central. Europeans also increasingly see pressure. We see it from the surveys coming from international tensions and threats. The good side of that is that it can be a trigger for broader conversations about EU benefits, and we also see it in the surveys. There's a demand for more assertiveness and autonomy of the European Union. And it could be a trigger also for more citizens' engagement, including through the conference on the future of Europe. In this crisis, humanity has been collectively bent to nature, and as such, green and climate change as topics will only grow in importance. And the EU is using its voice as a global leader, not only using our economic clout, but also using our voice and our values to bring people together, like indeed was the case in the Global Response Initiative and with regard to vaccines that I mentioned. And then, of course, we at the same time as communicating even more in a global perspective, we also need to go much more local and connect people to issues. And we should also be aware of new threats to nationalize the recovery efforts, indeed, and not give the credit that is due to the European Union. So there we need to work very creatively also in terms of how we get our messages across. We need to be attentive to the usual scapegoating that is not new to this crisis. EU scapegoating has always been the favorite sport of some, but we need to factor it in. And then crucially, and I'm sure we will discuss it in the debate also, there's disinformation as a factor that has been important also in this crisis, sometimes indeed even vitally dangerous, because as you will all have seen examples of, wrong information about how this virus could be treated, wrong information about vaccination has been circulating at high speed sometimes. So there also we have very much tried to step up our action. I hope we will discuss this and many of the other issues as we go into the debate, and I look forward to this, and we'll be able to also pick up a couple of the points that I might have missed out in the discussion. So thank you very much for listening to me. I now look forward to listening to you.